After paying for an elderly man's stay, the manager fired her. 2 hours later, everyone was shaking with fear. Emily Thompson adjusted her name tag on the impeccable uniform of the Mountain Prince Hotel, where she had worked for 15 years as a receptionist. Her tired brown eyes, weary after another exhausting day, watched the torrential rain pounding against the windows of the main lobby. At 35, her face bore the marks of someone who knew the weight of responsibilities well. She was a single mother to Sophia, a 14-year-old teenager, and still helped her mother, Mrs. Teresa, with medical expenses. The clock showed 11:45 p.m., and her shift was about to end when Richard Miller, the night supervisor, approached with his usual air of superiority. "Emily, I need to handle an emergency in the storage room. Keep an eye on the reception," he ordered, not waiting for a response. Emily simply nodded. Already accustomed to her colleague's authoritarian manner, which had become even more unbearable in recent months since rumors of a possible promotion to management began circulating. As she organized some guest records, Emily received a message from Sophia. "Mum, Grandma is in a lot of pain again." Her heart sank. The receptionist's salary barely covered basic expenses, and Mrs. Teresa's medications consumed a large portion of her savings. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she almost didn't notice the arrival of an elderly man, completely drenched, carrying only a small suitcase. "Good evening, young lady," he said in a shaky voice, dripping water onto the marble floor of the lobby. "I really need a room for tonight." Emily immediately noticed something different in his eyes. There was a mix of confusion and dignity that moved her. While registering the guest, Mr. Albert Smith, as he introduced himself, Emily noticed that his hands trembled as he tried to operate the credit card. After 3 failed attempts, he began rummaging through his pockets, growing increasingly agitated. "I could have sworn I had my wallet. It must have fallen in the taxi." Emily looked around. Richard hadn't returned yet, and the lobby was deserted. The hotel's policies were clear: no prepayment, no stay. But something about that gentleman stirred her compassion. Perhaps it was the way he reminded her of her father, who had passed away years ago. Or maybe it was simply her intuition telling her that he needed help. "Don't worry, Mr. Albert," she said, lowering her voice. "I'll take care of it." Emily took out her own credit card and paid for the night. It was almost 2 days' worth of her salary, but she couldn't leave that man out on the street on a night like this. Mr. Albert tried to protest, but Emily was already arranging his key. "How you can sort this out tomorrow calmly. Right now you need to rest." She personally escorted him to the elevator, making sure he safely reached his room. When she returned to the reception desk, she found Richard standing behind the counter, arms crossed and a sly smile on his lips. "Very interesting, Emily. Very interesting indeed." His tone sent a chill down her spine. "You know it's strictly forbidden to use personal funds to pay for a guest's stay, don't you?" "Richard, it was an emergency. He was confused. He could have gotten sick out there." "Rules are rules, Emily, and you broke them." He was typing furiously on the computer. "As a supervisor, I am obligated to report this to management immediately." Emily felt her stomach drop. She knew the hotel's code of conduct well, but she also knew Richard and his boundless ambition. He had been waiting for an opportunity like this. At home, it was already past 2 in the morning when Emily finally allowed herself to cry. Sophie, who had been waiting up for her, hugged her mother without fully understanding what had happened. "It's going to be okay, Mom," whispered the teenager, showing a maturity beyond her years. The next morning, Emily was called into the management office as soon as she arrived at work. Mr. Paul, the general manager, seemed genuinely uncomfortable as he handed her the termination letter. "I'm sorry, Emily, but you know our policies. I can't make exceptions." As she packed up her things under the curious gazes of her colleagues, Emily saw Richard walk by, wearing a triumphant smile. At that moment, she had no idea that her act of kindness on a rainy night would be the start of a much greater transformation in her life. The following weeks were a test of resilience for Emily. After 15 years dedicated to the Mountain Prince Hotel, she now found herself sending out resumes and facing unsuccessful interviews. The job market wasn't favorable for professionals her age, as some recruiters subtly pointed out. At home, the difficulties piled up. Mrs. Teresa needed to increase the dosage of her medication, and Sophie required new school supplies. Emily was already considering selling her car, the last material reminder she had of her father, when she received a call that would change the course of her story. "Mrs. Emily Thompson?" The deep voice on the other end of the line had a formal tone. "This is Edward Smith, son of Mr. Albert Smith, who stayed at the Mountain Prince Hotel a few weeks ago." Emily sat down, immediately recalling the night that led to her dismissal. "Yes, I remember Mr. Albert well. Is he doing all right?" "He's doing great, thanks to your help." Edward paused. "Actually, I'd like to speak with you in person. Would it be possible for us to meet today?" The meeting was scheduled at an elegant cafe in the city center. Emily chose her best outfit, one she saved for important interviews. When she arrived, she was greeted by a man in his 50s with graying hair and a warm smile that strongly resembled Mr. Albert. "My father is a special man," Edward began after the initial greetings. "He built one of the largest hotel chains in the country, the Smith Hotel Group, which includes the Mountain Prince Hotel." Emily felt her heart race. "But he has a peculiar habit. Occasionally he travels incognito, staying at our hotels to observe how employees treat seemingly vulnerable people." Emily listened in astonishment as Edward explained that his father was known in the business world as the anonymous philanthropist, dedicating a large portion of his fortune to helping workers in vulnerable situations. "That night wasn't an accident, Emily. It was a test, and you were the only one in the entire network who showed true compassion, even at the risk of losing your job." The revelation left Emily speechless. Edward continued, "We also discovered that the current interim manager, Richard Miller, has been delivering concerning results. Guest satisfaction has dropped 40% since he took over, and we've received numerous complaints about his management." "I can imagine," Emily commented, recalling Richard's authoritarian behavior. "He always prioritized numbers over people." "That's exactly why I'm here." Edward leaned forward, his gaze conveying seriousness. "We would like to offer you the position of general manager at the Mountain Prince Hotel." Emily nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Me? But I've never held a management position before. My father always says we can teach technical skills, but we can't teach character." Edward smiled. "Besides, your 15 years of experience and exemplary track record speak for themselves. You know the hotel better than anyone." The offer was surreal. A salary 3 times higher than her previous one, full benefits, and the autonomy to implement changes. Emily thought of Sophia, her mother, and the mounting bills, but she also thought of the enormous responsibility it would entail. "Can I think about it for a bit?" she asked, feeling the weight of the decision. "Of course," Edward replied, handing her his card. "But don't take too long. The hotel urgently needs a change." That night, Emily had a long conversation with Sophia and Mrs. Teresa. Surprisingly, her daughter was the most enthusiastic. "Mum, you've always taken care of everyone. Now it's your chance to do it on a grand scale." The next morning, Emily called Edward to accept the proposal. As she hung up the phone, she glanced at the photo of her father on the bedside table. "Dad, you always said kindness comes back to those who practice it. I think you were right." What Emily didn't know was that her real journey was just beginning. Managing the hotel would be her smallest challenge compared to the resistance and conspiracies she would face. But for now, she allowed herself to smile, feeling that her life was finally taking a new direction. Emily's return to the Mountain Prince Hotel as general manager caused quite a stir. Employees whispered in the hallways, some with genuine smiles, others with suspicious glances. Richard, who had been informed of his replacement just minutes before, remained in his office, refusing to attend the transition meeting. Edward Smith made a point of introducing her personally to the team during a meeting that filled the hotel's event hall. "Starting today, Emily Thompson takes over as general manager with full autonomy to implement the necessary changes," he announced, observing the mixed reactions among those present. Marion, Richard's former assistant, approached her after the meeting with a folder full of documents. "Mrs. Thompson, here is the report for the last 3 months," she said, her professional tone masking any emotion. "Mr. Miller requests that you sign the transfer of responsibilities form." Settled into her new office, Emily began to analyze the documents. The findings were concerning: declining satisfaction rates, alarming employee turnover, and a series of questionable decisions that had affected team morale. Among the papers, she found a private memo from Richard, detailing his cost-cutting strategy, reducing benefits, outsourcing essential services, and even a plan to replace long-term employees with temporary workers. "Excuse me, Emily?" A familiar voice made her look up. It was Charles, the restaurant chef who had worked with her all those years. "Can I have a moment?" "Of course, Charles. Come in, please." Emily smiled, genuinely happy to see a friendly face. The chef sat down, visibly nervous. "I need to tell you something. Over the past few weeks, Richard was planning to outsource the entire food service. Many of us would lose our jobs, including my entire team, who have been here for over a decade." Emily felt her stomach churn. "That won't happen, Charles. You can rest easy." As the day progressed, more employees sought out Emily, each with their own story of concerns and insecurities. During a tour of the hotel, she noticed small details that had changed. The once impeccable garden was now poorly maintained. The spa, which was the hotel's pride, had equipment with overdue maintenance, and the characteristic smiles of the employees had been replaced by anxious looks. At home that night, Sophie found her mother surrounded by papers at the kitchen table. "How was your first day, Mom?" "Challenging, sweetheart." Helena sighed, but then noticed something interesting in the documents she was reviewing. "Sophia, you're good with spreadsheets. Can you take a look at this?" The teenager sat down next to her mother, carefully analyzing the numbers. "Mom, there's something strange here. These values don't match the totals presented." Helena picked up her pen, circling the discrepancies her daughter pointed out. The more they analyzed, the more irregularities they found. "You're right, sweetheart, there's something very wrong with these financial reports." The next day, Helena arrived early at the hotel, determined to start the necessary changes. Her first action was to call a meeting with all department heads. To her surprise, she found some familiar faces among those who had been promoted by Richard, people she knew were his closest allies. "Starting today, we will establish new guidelines," she announced, keeping her voice steady despite her nervousness. "First, no dismissals will be carried out without a fair and transparent evaluation. Second, all supplier contracts will be reviewed. Third, we will implement a direct communication channel between employees and management." The reaction was immediate. Some managers exchanged worried glances, while others began taking furious notes. George, the maintenance manager recently promoted by Richard, raised his hand. "With all due respect, Mrs. Thompson, but these changes could destabilize processes that are already established." "Established processes are not always correct processes, George," replied Helena, maintaining a professional tone. "Let's analyze each area individually and make the necessary adjustments." At the end of the meeting, as the managers were leaving, Emily noticed groups forming in the hallway, speaking in hushed tones. She knew she had stirred up a hornet's nest, but she was prepared to face the consequences. What she didn't expect was to find, upon returning to her office, an anonymous envelope on her desk containing old photos of herself in compromising situations, clearly manipulated. The envelope with the doctored photos trembled in Emily's hands as she tried to maintain her composure. Her first instinct was to call Edward Smith, but something stopped her. She didn't want to appear weak so early in her tenure as manager. Besides, an idea was beginning to form in her mind. That same afternoon, during a routine inspection of the hotel's laundry, Emily found Mrs. Zuleide, the longest-serving employee in the department, organizing sheets with her usual efficiency. "Mrs. Zuleide, can we talk for a moment?" The gray-haired woman smiled, her eyes shining with the wisdom accumulated over decades of work. "Of course, my dear. I've been expecting your visit." During their conversation, Emily discovered that Mrs. Zuleide had been a silent witness to far more than she had imagined. The employee revealed that Richard Miller had kept a secret file on his old computer, containing compromising information about various employees, which he used as leverage when needed. "But he made a mistake, my dear," Mrs. Zuleide said, lowering her voice. "He boasted too much around Peter from IT, that new boy he hired himself. The young man was outraged and made backup copies of everything in case he needed to report something." Emily felt a wave of hope. "Mrs. Zuleide, do you think Peter would talk to me?" "I'm sure he would. He has a good heart. He was just too scared to speak up before." Peter, the young IT technician, proved to be a valuable source of information. Not only did he confirm the existence of Richard's blackmail file, but he also presented evidence of manipulation in the hotel's systems to cover up financial irregularities. "Take a look," explained Peter, showing spreadsheets on his computer. "He created a parallel accounting system. The official numbers show one thing, but the reality is completely different. Meanwhile, Sophia continued helping her mother at home, analyzing documents and proposing innovative solutions. "Mom, what if you created an app for guests to evaluate services in real time? That way, you'd get instant feedback and could resolve issues more quickly." Her daughter's suggestion sparked an idea in Emily's mind. The next morning, she gathered her new trusted team: Peter from IT, Mrs. Zulaida, Charles from the restaurant, and Marion, Richard's former assistant, who, to everyone's surprise, had become a valuable ally after uncovering her old boss's manipulations. "We need to modernize our processes while maintaining the human touch that has always been the hallmark of the hotel," explained Emily. "We'll implement new technologies, but our main focus will be the well-being of both guests and staff." The first significant change was the creation of an employee committee with representatives from all departments. Weekly meetings allowed everyone to voice their concerns and suggestions directly to management. The initiative, suggested by Mrs. Zulaidi, began to restore the team's trust. Charles, inspired by the new atmosphere, proposed an organic garden project on the hotel's rooftop, which would supply fresh ingredients for the restaurant and also serve as a therapeutic activity for the staff. The idea was immediately approved by Emily. Marion, in turn, uncovered documents proving that Richard had diverted funds intended for the Employee Benefits Fund. "Emily, this is very serious," she warned, showing the evidence. "He not only harmed the team, but may have also committed tax fraud." As the positive changes began to take shape, Emily received a surprise visit in her office. It was Amanda, a former employee who had been fired by Richard months earlier. "I came because I heard about the changes you're implementing," she said, emotional. "And also because I have something important to share about the day I was fired." Amanda's account turned out to be the missing piece in the puzzle Emily was putting together. The information she brought not only confirmed suspicions about Richard, but also pointed to a much larger scheme involving overcharged suppliers and bribes. By the end of that day, as she organized all the evidence she had gathered, Emily received an anonymous message on her phone. "Be careful with what you're doing. Some doors should remain closed." The threat, instead of intimidating her, only strengthened her resolve. With the support of her new trusted team, she was ready to face any challenge that lay ahead. 3 months had passed since Emily took over as manager of the Mountain Prince Hotel, and the changes were visible to the naked eye. The garden once again displayed its vibrant colors. The spa was running at full capacity with renewed equipment, and most importantly, smiles had returned to the faces of the staff. The implementation of the app suggested by Sophia had been a resounding success. Guests loved being able to communicate their needs and feedback in real time, and the team responded with impressive agility. On a particularly busy afternoon, Emily proudly observed the digital feedback panel installed at the reception, displaying a satisfaction rate of 92%. "Emily, you need to see this," exclaimed Marion, rushing into her office. She was carrying a tourism and hospitality magazine, one of the most respected in the industry. "There's an article about the changes at the hotel." The article, written by the renowned hotel critic Robert Mendez, highlighted the quiet revolution taking place at the Mountain Prince. In times where automation threatens to depersonalize the hotel experience, we find here a rare example of how technology and humanization can walk hand in hand, read one excerpt. The organic garden on the terrace, an idea from Charles, had become an attraction in itself. Guests made a point of participating in cooking workshops where they learned to prepare dishes with freshly harvested ingredients. The project had even caught the attention of a major television network, which was planning a special report on sustainable initiatives in hotels. However, not everything was rosy. Emily realized that resistance to her changes had become more sophisticated. George, the maintenance manager, had begun subtly sabotaging some initiatives, delaying essential repairs and hindering the implementation of new projects. "Mrs. Thompson," interrupted Peter, the IT technician, during a committee meeting, "I've discovered unauthorized access attempts to our system. Someone is trying to get into the financial files." Emily exchanged worried glances with Marion. The evidence they had gathered about Richard's irregularities was stored precisely in those files. "Peter, can you trace the origin of these attempts?" "Not yet, but—" Peter hesitated, looking nervously around. "I received a strange offer yesterday. A man offered me a considerable sum to facilitate some system access." The news was unsettling, but Emily didn't have time to delve into it at that moment. Mr. Albert Smith, Edward's father, had announced a surprise visit to the hotel. This time not as a mysterious guest, but as the official owner, eager to see the changes implemented firsthand. During the hotel tour, Mr. Albert seemed particularly moved when he saw the new staff lounge, a cozy space Emily had created by repurposing an underutilized area. "You know, young lady," he said, his eyes misty, "when I started in this business 50 years ago, I worked as a baggage handler. I know well the value of a place where one can recharge with dignity." The day of the visit also marked the start of a new trainee program, designed by Emily in partnership with local technical schools. Among the selected was Louis, a young wheelchair user with exceptional talents for customer service. The hiring had initially faced some resistance, but Emily stood firm in her decision to make the hotel a more inclusive environment. "My daughter, Mrs. Zuleide," called at the end of the day, after Mr. Albert had left. "There's something you need to know. I overheard a conversation in the locker room. George was arranging something with people from outside the hotel. They mentioned an important meeting tomorrow night at the old storage area." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The old storage area was an isolated part of the hotel, rarely used since the renovation. "Thank you, Mrs. Zuleide. I'll take the necessary steps." At home, while recounting the day's events to Sophia and Mrs. Teresa, Emily received a call from Edward Smith. "Emily, excellent work today. My father was impressed, but..." There was a tense pause. "I received an anonymous complaint about some irregularities in your management. Normally I wouldn't pay attention to this kind of thing, but the complainant provided documents that seem quite convincing." Emily felt her blood run cold. She knew her opponents wouldn't give up easily, but she hadn't expected such a low blow. As she hung up the phone, her mind was already formulating a plan. The secret meeting at the old storage area might be her chance to uncover who was behind the entire conspiracy. The night promised to be decisive. Emily had carefully planned every detail with the help of Peter and Marion. Security cameras were strategically positioned around the old warehouse, and discreet microphones were installed inside the premises. The technology that once served Richard's dark purposes would now be used to expose the truth. "Mum, are you sure you don't want me to come with you?" asked Sophia, concerned. The teenager had inherited her mother's sense of justice and felt personally invested in the entire situation. "No, sweetheart. You stay with Grandma. Peter and Marion will be with me in the security room, monitoring everything." Emily hugged her daughter, feeling a mix of pride and apprehension. "Besides, I need you to keep working on that presentation for tomorrow." Sophia had developed a revolutionary proposal for the hotel's management system, integrating sustainability and technology in a way that had impressed even the most experienced technicians. Her presentation to the board of the Smith Hotel Group was scheduled for the next day. At the hotel, Emily found Charles preparing the special dinner that would be served at the weekend charity event. The chef was beaming over the success of his new organic menu. "Emily, you won't believe it. That food critic Fernando Pessoa made a reservation for tomorrow." "That's wonderful, Charles," Emily smiled, but her mind was focused on the meeting that would take place in a few hours. "Listen, if something goes wrong tonight, don't even think about it," Charles interrupted, holding her hands. "We are all with you. Every employee at this hotel knows the difference you've made in our lives." At 11 p.m., Emily, Peter, and Marion positioned themselves in the security room. The cameras showed movement in the hallway leading to the old storage area. George was the first to arrive, followed by two men Emily had never seen before. Minutes later, a familiar figure appeared on the screens, Richard Miller. "Is the audio working?" whispered Emily, feeling her heart race. Peter adjusted some controls. The voices began to come through more clearly on the speakers. "The plan is in motion," Richard said. "The anonymous tip was just the beginning. I have forged evidence that will completely destroy her reputation." "What about the original documents?" asked one of the unknown men. "All altered," replied George. "No one will uncover the real irregularities. The problem is that IT kid, he's been snooping around too much." Emily glanced at Peter, who was typing furiously on his computer, ensuring everything was being recorded. Marion was taking detailed notes, connecting the information with the evidence they already had. The conversation continued, revealing a scheme much larger than they had imagined. Richard wasn't acting alone. There was a network of ghost suppliers and overpriced contracts that extended to other hotels in the chain. George was just a pawn on the board, manipulated with promises of promotion. "But what if she manages to prove something?" asked George, his voice betraying nervousness. Richard laughed disdainfully. "Impossible. Tomorrow, during that brat's presentation, we'll deliver the final blow. We've already planted evidence on her personal computer. When the girl tries to make her presentation, well, let's just say some interesting documents will appear on the screen." Emily felt her blood boil. They planned to use Sophia to destroy her. It was too low, even for Richard. "We have everything," whispered Peter. "Every word is recorded, and I've already sent copies to secure servers." At that moment, a new figure appeared on the screens. Emily held her breath as she recognized Augusto Mendez, the financial director of the Smith Hotel Group, and Richard's uncle. The man who was supposed to oversee the hotel's accounts was in fact the mastermind behind the entire operation. "Are the cameras in the West Corridor turned off?" Augusto asked his nephew. "Yes, uncle. No one will see us leaving here." What they didn't know was that Emily had installed extra cameras, precisely anticipating this move. Every movement was being recorded, every word captured. The puzzle was finally coming together. "Emily," called Marion, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something you need to see." She pointed to her tablet, which displayed some emails recovered from the hotel's old server. "This explains why Augusto is so determined to bring you down." The emails revealed a shocking truth. 15 years ago, when Emily first started working at the hotel, she had unknowingly thwarted a major fraud scheme planned by Augusto. Her meticulous work as a receptionist had exposed inconsistencies that forced the financial director to abandon his plans at the time. "So that's why," murmured Emily. "It's not just about now. It's about a 15-year-old grudge." As they watched the conspirators leave the storage room, Emily was already planning her next move. Tomorrow would be a decisive day, not just for her, but for the entire future of the Mountain Prince Hotel. The morning of the big day dawned with a different energy at the Mountain Prince Hotel. The main hall had been prepared for Sophia's presentation and the subsequent meeting with the Smith Hotel Group's board. Emily, who hadn't slept all night, was reviewing the evidence one last time with Peter and Marion. "Are all the files secure?" asked Emily, nervously adjusting her navy blue blazer. "Triple checked," confirmed Peter. "I've created an unbreakable backup system. Even if they try to sabotage Sophia's presentation, we have full control over what will be displayed." Marion was organizing a series of folders on her desk. "The recovered emails have been authenticated by 3 different experts. There's no way to dispute their authenticity." In the hallway, Emily met Mrs. Zulaida, who hugged her tightly. "Everything will be fine, my dear. The truth always prevails." The hall began to fill up gradually. Edward Smith arrived accompanied by his father, Mr. Albert, and other members of the board. Richard and August Miller entered shortly after, displaying confident smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Sophia, dressed in a formal outfit that made her look older than her 14 years, was setting up her laptop with the projector, with the help of Louis, the new trainee. The girl had insisted that he assist her with the presentation, showing the same sensitivity toward people that her mother had always had. "Ladies and gentlemen," Edward began, "we are here to learn about an innovative hotel management proposal developed by a very special young woman. But first, I would like to hear a few words from our general manager, Emily Thompson." Emily stood up, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on her. Through the glass doors of the hall, she could see the revitalized garden of the hotel, a symbol of all the positive changes over the past few months. "When I took over the management of this hotel," she began, "I learned that leadership is not just about numbers or processes, it's about people. Every employee, every guest, every small detail that makes this place not just a hotel but a home away from home." Her eyes met Richard's, who was discreetly fiddling with his phone. Emily knew exactly what he was planning. The moment he would try to sabotage Sophia's presentation was approaching. "That's why," she continued, "before passing the floor to my daughter, I would like to share some important findings about the previous management of this hotel." Richard and August exchanged glances, visibly tensing in their chairs. "Peter, please," called Emily. The IT technician activated his tablet and the screens in the room began displaying the recordings from the previous night. The voices of Richard, George, and August echoed through the space, revealing every detail of their conspiracy. "This is an invasion of privacy," protested August, standing up abruptly. "No more than forging documents and sabotaging honest employees," replied Emily, her voice firm. "Or should I mention the emails from 15 years ago, Mr. Miller?" Edward Smith watched everything with a grave expression. His father, Mr. Albert, maintained a calm demeanor, almost as if he had been expecting something like this. "The evidence doesn't stop there," continued Emily, as Marion distributed folders with documents to each board member. "We have proof of a systematic scheme of embezzlement, overpriced contracts, and workplace harassment against employees." Richard tried to stand up to leave, but was stopped by 2 security guards who had discreetly positioned themselves near the doors. George, pale in his corner, seemed on the verge of fainting, but most importantly, Emily looked directly at Sophia, who smiled proudly. "Despite all the attempts at sabotage, this hotel not only survived, but has become an example of ethical and humane management." Mr. Albert Smith slowly rose, leaning on his cane. The entire room fell silent. "Miss Thompson," his voice carried the weight of experience, "when I decided to test your compassion on that rainy night, I already suspected something was wrong in our hotels. But I never imagined the extent of the problem," he turned to Augusto, "nor the depth of the betrayal." Edward Smith made a signal and 2 more security guards entered the hall. "The police are already on their way," he announced. "Everyone involved will be thoroughly investigated." Augusto Mendez, watching his empire of lies crumble, attempted one last blow. "You have no idea what this will cause. The group's reputation, interrupted Mr. Albert, "will be strengthened by honesty and transparency, values that we are fortunate to find in people like Emily and her team." As Richard and Augusto were escorted out of the hall, Emily felt a hand grasp hers. It was Sophia, her eyes shining with admiration. "Now, if you'll allow me," said Emily, regaining her composure, "I would like you to meet the true innovation we have prepared for the future of the Mountain Prince Hotel." Sophia's presentation was a resounding success. Her project integrating sustainability and technology impressed everyone, especially when she demonstrated how the developed app could be expanded to the entire hotel network, creating a unique and personalized experience for each guest. In the weeks that followed, the Mountain Prince Hotel underwent an even deeper transformation. The departure of Richard and his allies opened the door for well-deserved promotions. Marion took on the role of administrative coordinator, Peter was promoted to technology manager, and Charles gained full autonomy to expand his sustainable gastronomy project. On a particularly busy morning, Emily received a special visitor in her office. Amanda, the former employee who had helped expose the irregularities, was returning to the hotel as the new human resources coordinator. "I never imagined I'd be back here under these circumstances," Amanda confided, emotional. "You not only corrected the injustices, Emily, but you created an environment where people truly want to work." The hotel had become a case study in humanized management. Universities requested technical visits, and other establishments in the network began implementing the changes proposed by Emily and her team. The story of the receptionist who became the general manager inspired people across the country. Mrs. Teresa, now with access to quality medical treatments thanks to the new health plan implemented by Emily, actively participated in the activities at the rooftop garden. Her experience with medicinal plants had inspired a new project, a therapeutic garden for employees and guests. "Look here," Mrs. Teresa said to a group of interested guests. "Each plant here has a story and a purpose, just like the people in this hotel." Sophia, recognized for her early talent, had been invited to a special youth leadership program where she shared her ideas on innovation and sustainability with other teenagers. Her maturity and social vision impressed everyone. "You know, Mom," she said during a family dinner, "I think I finally understand why Grandpa always said that no success is worth it if we can't share it." Lewis, the wheelchair-bound trainee, had become an example of resilience. His project to make the hotel more accessible not only improved the physical structure, but also raised awareness among employees and guests about the importance of inclusion. On a quiet afternoon while overseeing the spa renovations, Emily received a call from Edward Smith. "Emily, I have extraordinary news. The board of directors unanimously approved your expansion proposal. You will be the regional operations director for the entire Southeast region." The news was impressive, but Emily had a counter-proposal. "Edward, I appreciate the trust, but I'd like to suggest something different. Instead of taking on the regional directorship, I'd prefer to develop a mentorship program for new managers. I can share our experience with other hotels while keeping my base here where it all began. The silence on the other end of the line was followed by a warm laugh. You know, my father said you'd respond exactly like that. He always knew that his true calling was not just to manage, but to inspire and transform. The following week, the Mountain Prince Hotel hosted its first workshop on humanized management. Managers from across the network came to learn from Emily and her team's experience. Mrs. Zulaida, with her characteristic wisdom, was invited to speak about the importance of valuing each employee. The secret, she explained to the participants, is not just in the big changes, but in the small daily gestures. A sincere good morning, a moment of listening, an act of compassion. That's how it all began, on a rainy night. During the event, Emily watched her daughter leading a session on innovation and sustainability. Sophie had inherited not only her determination, but also her ability to see potential in people. Beside her, Mrs. Teresa smiled proudly, holding a bouquet of aromatic herbs harvested from the garden she had helped create. The Mountain Prince Hotel was no longer just a luxury establishment. It had become a symbol of transformation and hope. The words of Mr. Albert Smith, spoken during his last visit, echoed through the halls. True luxury is not in the marble and crystal, but in the human warmth that makes people feel at home. And so, as the sun set on another workday, Emily gazed out the window of her office at the hotel garden. The flowers, like the people, had blossomed under proper care. Her journey, which had begun with a simple act of kindness, had transformed into a movement for change far greater than she had ever imagined. Autumn had arrived in Chicago, painting the leaves of the Mountain Prince Hotel's garden in shades of gold and red. 6 months had passed since the big revelation that exposed Richard and Augusto's scheme, and the hotel was experiencing its most prosperous moment. Emily walked through the lobby, greeting guests and staff, when she was approached by a familiar figure, Robert Mendez, the hotel critic who had written the first article about the changes at the hotel. "Miss Thompson," he smiled, "I came personally to see the updates. I heard you're revolutionizing the concept of social hospitality." Indeed, the hotel had become a model of social innovation. The inclusive trainee program, initiated with Louis, now had 15 participants, including people with various disabilities and young individuals from underprivileged communities. Mrs. Teresa's therapeutic garden had inspired a herbal medicine project that served both employees and guests. "Come with me," Emily invited. "I want to show you our newest project." On the 3rd floor, a space previously occupied by unused meeting rooms had been transformed into a professional training center. There, hotel employees offered free courses to the local community, ranging from hospitality techniques to basic programming, the latter coordinated by Peter. "The idea came up during a conversation with Sophia," Emily explained. "She made me realize that our greatest asset isn't the luxurious facilities, but the knowledge and experience of our team." Sophia, who at just 15 years old already demonstrated a deep understanding of social responsibility, had developed a mentorship program where teenagers from the region shadowed hotel professionals, learning practical aspects of hotel management. During the tour, they found Marion leading a class on administrative management for a diverse group of students. Among them was Sophie, a 60-year-old woman who had decided to restart her professional life after years dedicated solely to her family. "The most interesting part," Marion commented upon seeing Emily, "is how each student brings their own perspective. Sophie, for example, revolutionized our approach to elderly customer service with her insights. In the restaurant, Charles had turned the kitchen into a sustainable gastronomy lab. In addition to supplying the hotel with organic produce from the garden, he now offered workshops on full food utilization for underprivileged communities. "We've reduced our waste by 90%, he proudly explained to Robert Mendez, "and most importantly, we're teaching others to do the same." Robert's report, however, would have to wait. A group of Japanese hospitality experts had arrived for a technical visit. The Mountain Prince Hotel was becoming an international benchmark for humanized management. "Emily-san," greeted Takeshi Yamamoto, the leader of the Japanese delegation, "your reputation has reached Tokyo. We want to understand how you managed to balance operational efficiency with human development? The answer to this question was scattered throughout the hotel. In the laundry room, Mrs. Zulida was guiding a group of young apprentices, teaching not only work techniques, but also values like respect and dedication. At the reception, Louis was coordinating a project to adapt services for people with different needs. "The secret," Emily replied to the Japanese group, "is understanding that every person has something valuable to contribute. Our role is to create an environment where those talents can flourish." The international visit coincided with a special moment, the graduation of the first class from the training center. Among the graduates was John, a young man Emily had met when he was selling candy at the traffic light in front of the hotel. Now, after 6 months of training, he had been hired as an IT assistant. "Do you know what's most amazing?" Sophie commented during the graduation ceremony. "Every person we transform here will go on to transform 10 others out there." Her daughter's observation made Emily reflect on the true reach of her work. The hotel had become more than a commercial venture. It was a catalyst for social change. At the end of the day, as she organized her schedule for the following week, Emily received an email that made her pause. It was from an important international hospitality organization, inviting her to be the keynote speaker at a conference in Geneva. "Mom," Sophie called, entering the room with a mysterious smile, "there's a surprise for you in the garden." When she reached the garden, Emily found all the staff gathered. In the center, a newly installed plaque shone under the evening lights. "Emily Thompson Garden, where compassion blooms." The invitation to the conference in Geneva brought with it a wave of new responsibilities and challenges. Emily found herself facing a complex decision: how to expand the reach of her work without losing the essence that made the Mountain Prince Hotel so special. "You don't have to choose, Mom," Sophie said during one of their now frequent strategic lunches in the therapeutic garden. "You can use technology to multiply your impact." Sophie's suggestion planted the seed of an ambitious idea. With the help of Peter and his IT team, Emily began developing a digital platform that would allow them to share their humanized management model with other hotels around the world. "It's like creating a neural network of compassion," explained Peter, excited about the project. "Every hotel that adopts our practices becomes a new hub of transformation." The development of the platform coincided with an important visit. Edward Smith brought a group of investors to the hotel who were interested in replicating the model across other hotel chains. Among them was Victor Chang, a Chinese entrepreneur known for transforming traditional businesses through technology. "Impressive," commented Chang after observing one of the training sessions at the Learning Center. "But how do you ensure that expansion won't dilute the quality of service?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Amanda, while coordinating a training session with new employees, had developed a unique evaluation system based not only on traditional metrics, but also on social impact indicators. "Every action is measured across 3 dimensions," she explained to the investors: operational efficiency, customer satisfaction, and social transformation. We call it the human value triad. The system created by Amanda garnered so much attention that companies outside the hospitality industry began seeking guidance from the hotel. Emily realized they were creating something bigger than a management model. It was a movement of business transformation. Amid all this activity, Mrs. Teresa surprised everyone by proposing an expansion of the therapeutic garden. Her idea was to create a community cultivation space where neighborhood residents could learn about medicinal plants and urban farming. "Plants teach us about patience and care," she told the project participants. "These are lessons that apply to both the garden and life." However, the hotel's success also brought challenges. Major competing chains began superficially copying some initiatives without understanding the depth of the work being done. "They think it's just about creating a garden and offering a few courses," commented Charles, frustrated after seeing a report about a hotel that claimed to follow the Mountain Prince model. "They don't understand that the heart of our work lies in the people." It was Marion who suggested an elegant solution. Instead of trying to stop the copies, they decided to openly share their methodologies through a certification program. Hotels genuinely interested in implementing the model would receive direct mentorship from the team. "This way we turn potential competitors into partners," she explained during a management committee meeting. Louis, now the accessibility coordinator, expanded the program to include specific inclusion criteria. It's not enough to have ramps and elevators, he argued. We need to create a culture of genuine hospitality. The most ambitious project, however, came from a collaboration between Sophia and a group of young people from the mentorship program. They proposed creating a social hospitality school where all the innovations developed at the hotel would be turned into a structured curriculum. Imagine, Mom, said Sophia, her eyes shining with excitement. We could train the next generation of hotel managers with a completely different vision of what business success means. The idea for the school quickly gained momentum. Edward Smith not only approved the project, but also suggested that the Smith Hotel Group donate a plot of land adjacent to the hotel for its construction. Emily, he said during a planning meeting, you didn't just save a hotel. You created a legacy that goes far beyond the walls of this building. As she prepared her presentation for the conference in Geneva, Emily reflected on the extraordinary journey she had lived. From receptionist to leader of a business transformation movement, every step had been guided by a simple principle: the value of compassion. In the garden that now bore her name, watching Mrs. Teresa teach a group of children about growing aromatic herbs, Emily smiled. True success, she had learned, wasn't measured in numbers or awards, but in the smiles and stories of transformation that blossomed around her. The auditorium in Geneva was packed. Executives, managers, and hospitality experts from around the world eagerly awaited the keynote speech at the International Sustainable Hospitality Congress. On the screen, images of the Mountain Prince Hotel alternated, showcasing its remarkable transformation. Emily, backstage, adjusted her microphone while reviewing her notes. Beside her, Sophia was putting the final touches on the presentation they had prepared together. The teenager had insisted on accompanying her mother on this trip, arguing that it was important to show the world that social transformation knows no age. Mrs. Thompson, called one of the event organizers, it's time. As Emily stepped onto the stage, she was greeted by a warm round of applause. Among the audience, familiar faces stood out. Edward Smith, who had made a point of being present, Robert Mendez, the hotel critic who first reported on the changes at the hotel, and to her surprise, Sophie, the 60-year-old student from the training program, now representing a senior tourism association. A year ago, Emily began, I was just a receptionist trying to do the right thing on a rainy night. The audience chuckled softly. Today I'm here to share not just a story of business success, but a movement of transformation that began with a simple act of compassion. The presentation that followed blended impressive data with touching human stories. The numbers spoke for themselves. 150% increase in guest satisfaction, a 90% reduction in employee turnover, and a 40% savings in operational costs through sustainable practices. But it was the personal stories that truly captured everyone's attention. The story of John, the former candy seller who had become an IT assistant. Lewis's project for accessible tourism, which had already inspired changes in hotels across 3 continents. Mrs. Teresa's therapeutic garden, which now received visits from botany and medical students from across the country. But our greatest pride, Emily said, gesturing for Sophia to join her on stage, is the next generation of leaders we are shaping. Sophia, with remarkable poise for her age, presented the Social Hospitality School project, which had already received applications from students in 12 different countries. Her vision of a more humane and inclusive hospitality industry drew enthusiastic applause from the audience. During the Q&A session, a Chinese executive raised her hand. How do you maintain service quality while implementing so many social initiatives? Actually, Emily replied, we've found that one drives the other. Employees who feel truly valued naturally deliver exceptional service. It's not about choosing between efficiency and humanity. It's about understanding that they are inseparable. After the lecture, during the reception, Emily was approached by several business people interested in implementing the model in their own establishments. Among them was Victor Chang, who had traveled all the way from China for the event. Miss Thompson, he said, after seeing your presentation, I finally understood what was missing in our attempts to replicate your success. It's not the programs or the initiatives themselves, it's the culture of care you've created. That evening, in her hotel room in Geneva, Emily received an exciting video call. The entire team from the Mountain Prince Hotel had gathered in the garden to share some news. The first class of the social hospitality school had started their lessons that day. "Look who's here, Emily," exclaimed Charles, turning the camera to show a familiar face. It was Mr. Albert Smith, who had insisted on delivering the inaugural lecture. "You know," Mr. Albert said, stepping closer to the camera, "when I decided to test people's compassion on that rainy night, I never imagined I'd find someone capable of turning a simple test into a global movement." Sophia, watching her mother get emotional during the call, whispered, "See, Mom? Grandpa always said that one good deed leads to others. Look how many you've started." As she ended the call, Emily noticed a message that had just arrived on her phone. It was from Amanda. The World Tourism Organization had selected the Mountain Prince Hotel as a case study in its new report on sustainable and inclusive tourism. On the other side of the world, in her room overlooking the Swiss Alps, Emily smiled, thinking about how a simple act of kindness on a rainy night had turned into something so grand and meaningful. It was a rainy night in Chicago, exactly 1 year after that fateful evening that had changed so many lives. Emily was in her office at the Mountain Prince Hotel, finalizing the last details for the celebration of the hotel's transformation anniversary. The event had been carefully planned to bring together everyone who had been part of this extraordinary journey. The hotel lobby was decorated with photos that told the story of the changes, from the revitalized garden to the smiles of the graduates from the training center. "Emily!" Marion called from the doorway. "The first guests are arriving." The main hall was unrecognizable. Charles and his team had prepared a special buffet using only ingredients from the organic garden. Mrs. Teresa had created arrangements with aromatic herbs from the therapeutic garden, filling the space with natural and welcoming fragrances. Among the guests were former and current employees, guests who had become friends, students from the training center, and representatives from hotels that had adopted the humanized management model. Edward and Albert Smith moved through the hall, proud of the legacy they had helped build. "Mom," Sophie approached, elegant in her first tailored suit, "it's time for your speech." Emily stepped onto the small makeshift stage, looking out at the smiling faces before her. Each face there told a story of transformation. "Exactly 1 year ago," she began, "on a night like this, an act of compassion changed not only my life, but the lives of hundreds of people. Today we are not just celebrating the success of a hotel, but the transformative power of kindness." As she spoke, Emily noticed movement at the entrance of the hall. An elderly woman, supported by a cane, timidly entered the room. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she recognized her. It was Mrs. Judith, one of the first guests to experience the hotel's changes, who had become a passionate advocate for inclusive tourism for seniors. "Every person in this hall," Emily continued, "represents a link in a chain of transformation. From the young trainees to the experienced masters like Mrs. Zulaidi, each has contributed to creating something greater than all of us." At that moment, Lewis approached the stage in his wheelchair, bringing a surprise, a video with testimonials from people impacted by the hotel's work. On the screen, familiar and unfamiliar faces alternated, sharing their stories of change. John, the former candy seller, now coordinated digital inclusion projects at 3 different hotels. Sophie had opened her own travel agency specializing in senior tourism. Mrs. Teresa's therapeutic garden had inspired similar projects in hospitals and schools across the region. "But our greatest achievement," Emily said, pausing emotionally, "cannot be measured in numbers or awards. It's in the smiles we see every day, in the lives that have been touched, in the stories that will continue to be written." Peter, operating the audio-visual system, began a slideshow of photos from the past year. Images of the garden in different seasons, graduation celebrations, moments of camaraderie between staff and guests, all telling a story of renewal and hope. "And today," Emily continued, "I have some news to share." She gestured for Sophia to join her on stage. "The Social Hospitality School is just the beginning. We are launching the Mountain Prince Foundation, dedicated to spreading this philosophy of humanized management to other industries beyond hospitality." The applause was interrupted by a sudden movement at the entrance of the hall. A familiar figure appeared, drenched by the rain. An elderly man, disoriented, seeking shelter. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Emily immediately stepped down from the stage, followed by Sophia. As they approached the man, They discovered he was a homeless person who had taken refuge from the storm. Without hesitation, Emily led him inside, asking Charles to arrange a hot meal. "See," she said, returning to the microphone, "the cycle continues. On another rainy night, we have the opportunity to practice the same compassion that started our journey." The man was welcomed by those present with the same warmth the hotel had become known for. Mrs. Teresa was already organizing a space at the hotel's partner shelter, while Amanda arranged dry clothes. By the end of the night, as the last guests said their goodbyes, Emily found a note left by Mr. Albert. "You haven't just transformed a hotel, my dear. You've reminded us of what it truly means to be human." In the garden that bore her name, under the rain that continued to fall, Emily embraced Sophia and Mrs. Teresa, watching the hotel lights reflected in the raindrops. The cycle of kindness that had begun a year ago continued to turn, touching more and more lives, proving that a simple act of compassion can indeed change the world.